And new this morning, we are now hearing from the Kremlin that Yevgeny Prigozhin met with President Vladimir Putin after his short-lived mutiny at the end of June. Remember that attempted coup? Well, we're told the meeting took place on June 29th. That was 5 days after the rebellion. CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen joins us now. Fred, this is a bit of a surprise, right? I mean, what can we read from this?
Well, it is, that's to say the least. It's a bit of a surprise. And I think it is something that certainly shows that Wagner, the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin and his fighters certainly are of huge significance to Vladimir Putin. If he was willing to meet with Yevgeny Prigozhin just 5 days after that mutiny. So obviously one of the things that we heard from the Kremlin today is no one really knew where Yevgeny Prigozhin was. People thought that he might have been in Belarus. Then, of course, the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, he told our own Matthew Chance last week that actually Yevgeny Prigozhin was back in St. Petersburg in Russia. So now the Kremlin coming out and saying that on June 29th, so just a couple of days, 5 days after that mutiny, Yevgeny Prigozhin and 35 commanders, as the Kremlin put it, were inside the Kremlin. Now, apparently, Vladimir Putin gave his own assessment of what they call the special military operation, which is obviously Russia's war in Ukraine. But then also about the mutiny itself. And then also, apparently, this according to the Kremlin, offered his thoughts on possible further deployments. Now, the interesting thing about all this is they said that 35 commanders took part, including Yevgeny Prigozhin. They did not say whether people from Russia's defense ministry took part. Of course, one of the things that we know is that Yevgeny Prigozhin was on his way to Moscow on June 24th, specifically to try and go after the defense minister and Vladimir Putin's top general. So obviously all of this directly also in defiance of Vladimir Putin. Now we're learning that Yevgeny Prigozhin was in fact in the Kremlin. It certainly seems to show that despite the fact that Yevgeny Prigozhin has now been discredited on Russian state media pretty much since that happened, the fighters that he commanded and controlled still seem very important for the Kremlin leader, guys.
Yeah, no question about that. Fred Pleitgen, thanks so much. And we want to bring in now CNN security analyst Beth Sanner, and Colonel Cedric Leighton is back with us. Beth, I want to start with you because I'm kind of mind blown, to be honest with you, and I'm not the expert that you are about all this, but Fred makes the great point. Over the course of the last several weeks, you've seen Prigozhin kind of completely undercut on Russian state media. You saw President Putin's statement when he finally started speaking after the mutiny, really attacking the idea of it and the actions that were taken. What do you make of the fact that Prigozhin was meeting with President Putin just 5 days after the mutiny?
Well, I think this shows another step in the Kremlin plan to deal with Prigozhin in this kind of post-mutiny environment. I think they have three things that are going on right here and that we're seeing unfold. One is that they're trying to change the narrative, and discrediting Prigozhin and getting leverage over the still popular figure is the first part of this plan. The second part is to wrest control over as much of Wagner as they can, because Wagner is extremely important. So they took over, for example, the internet, the disinformation arm, the IRA that still promotes disinformation worldwide, the Syria campaign. And then the third is what we saw, I think, in this meeting with Putin. And that is to figure out, how do we rebrand and reshape Wagner elements, the ones that we still need, says Putin, the ones that we can't yet get rid of, or maybe never can, because they're so important. So I think that's what we're seeing here unfold.
All right, Colonel Leighton, I want to bring you in to get your thoughts on what this says about Putin, that he would meet with Prigozhin mere days after the attempted coup.
Yeah, to me it seems, Pam, like this is a sense of his weakness. We're getting a sense that he's looking at things that he needs to change in order to maintain his power. It's also a situation, I think, where Prigozhin either has something on Putin or he's got enough leverage where he can actually control some of not only the narrative, but also what Putin does next. Think about what they have, for example, in Africa. You've got the Wagner Group all over Africa. You've got them in Syria. That's a huge arm of Russian foreign policy that's sitting right there. And if that is somehow stopped or doesn't work as well as it once did, that creates a real problem for the Kremlin. And Putin can't afford to have that problem in addition to the problems that he has in Ukraine right now.
Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, right?
Exactly,
Yeah, for sure.
exactly. And Beth, that kind of brings me to my next question. Our Ben Wiedemann called this kind of a soap opera, a little bit of an as the world turns to some degree as we watch From our position, if you're U.S. intelligence at this point in time, how are you kind of watching, analyzing what's been happening and trying to draw some conclusions about what this may say about next steps for President Putin and Russia?
Well, you break it down into the things that matter to U.S. interests. And I think about this kind of in concentric rings. The first part of it is, how does this affect Putin? And I think that, while it shows some weakness in terms of the symbiotic relationship, it doesn't necessarily threaten Putin in the near term. And so I think that, he actually is fairly in control at home in the wake of this. But as you move out these concentric rings to the Ukraine war, and then really to relationships, China, the relationship with China and how allies think about it, and then like this foreign policy security arm in Africa, Wagner, these things start to weaken as the ripples kind of go out on these concentric rings. So as an intel officer, you break these down and you start figuring out, what are the leverage points to not only understand it, but to take advantage of it.